In 1996, when Bill Clinton was president, part of northern Iraq fell into absolute crisis. The first Gulf War had happened, of course, under the previous president, George H.W. Bush, Gulf War I. In the wake of that war, the Kurdish population in Iraq had basically risen up and revolted against the Iraqi dictator, Saddam Hussein. Saddam responded by crushing them, and millions of Kurdish Iraqis fled into the mountains of northern Iraq and toward the border with Turkey. They were just trying to save themselves and their families. Turkey wouldn't let them cross the border. They really had nowhere else to go inside Iraq. Meanwhile, Saddam was coming after them in a genocidal rage. The UN ended up setting up what was intended to be a sort of safe zone for the Kurds in northern Iraq. It was protected by a no-fly zone. It was an international coalition effort with lots of U.S. aid groups providing help there, too. And that sort of inherently unstable situation lasted about 5 years. But in 1996, Bill Clinton's now president, Saddam attacked. And the coalition forces that were protecting the Iraqi Kurds in that part of northern Iraq, they bugged out. They left. And the reasons for that and the consequences of that are dark and complex, and that's a longer story. But in the immediate moment, in 1996, when that happened, the U.S. realized that it had a big, short-term, simple, urgent, moral, and strategic catastrophe on their hands. Because in the 5 years since Poppy Bush's Gulf War, with the Kurds rising up and not getting support from us, and then the Kurds having to flee Saddam, and then the U.S. helping to set up basically this protectorate for them, and then that failing, well, over those 5 years, a lot of things went wrong. And again, that is a complex and dark tale. But over those 5 years, a very simple moral imperative came into focus for the American government and the American people, which is that the U.S. had ended up hiring and allying with a lot of individual Iraqi Kurds. Individual Iraqi Kurds were brought on locally as interpreters and translators, which, of course, is crucial work. They were brought on board as drivers and support staff of all kinds. There was a few thousand of them who had directly helped U.S. and coalition personnel in northern Iraq over those troubled 5 years. And when the Iraqi dictator, Saddam Hussein, decided he was going to send 40,000 soldiers in, and the Republican Guard and the Mukhabarat and all that, when he decided he was going to send all those in and the coalition forces left, everybody who had helped or worked for the coalition forces and the U.S. aid groups up there just had a bullseye on them. They were marked for certain death because they had helped us. So, clear, simple moral imperative for the United States. And so, in 1996, September of 1996, the U.S. launched something called Operation Pacific Haven. And it was all pulled together on very short notice, but they did it. 6,600 Iraqi Kurds and other Iraqis who had assisted American aid groups and American coalition forces in Iraq, 6,600 of them were rushed by air. They were airlifted out of northern Iraq and also Turkey to a place they could be kept safe. They were brought here, to the U.S. territory of Guam. And those 6,600 Iraqi Kurds spent, on average, a number of weeks there while they were vetted, while their paperwork was processed to ultimately allow them to come into the United States, to allow them to come into the country they had risked their lives to help, the country which was now recognizing its debt and paying them back for that service, keeping a promise to them for once that we would keep them safe because they helped our forces. This past November 2020, a news outlet in Guam called the Pacific Daily News tracked down one of those Iraqis who had been brought there as part of that airlift over that few-month period when they got those 6,600 Iraqis out of there in 1996. They tracked him down all these years later to find out how things had turned out for him. His name is Hemin Barzanji, and in 1996, he and his whole nuclear family had been airlifted out as part of this emergency operation. It was his whole family, mom, dad, 6 kids. 24 years down the road from that, just this past November, Pacific Daily News found him in Utah, where he now lives. He told Pacific Daily News, quote, "We arrived in Guam, and we were shocked. It was just paradise to us. He said that he recalled there had been more than 150 families, all in the same desperate circumstances, all on that same flight with him and his family to Guam. Once they landed in Guam, they were given temporary housing. They were given medical care and help. He said, quote, "The moment we arrived in Guam, we were born again. That is the time and the place where we got a second chance at life." He said, "I personally would love to relive that Guam experience. We were welcomed. And the way we were situated in the place we lived, it was just amazing." He and his family stayed in Guam in 1996 for just under 2 months. They weren't there long. But in that 2 months, they were given housing, they were given medical care, they were vetted. Their applications to stay in the United States were processed. And then they left. They were approved to move to the mainland United States, and they moved to Utah. They had a family relation there. And now, 2 decades down the road, Mr. Barzanji, owns and operates his own business in Utah. His brother is in pharmacy school in Utah. His sister has left Utah for Boston because she's in law school in Boston, becoming an American lawyer. He told Pacific Daily News this past November, quote, "Look at us. If we hadn't come to the States, we would all be dead." That was how it worked over a quick 7-month emergency airlift period, starting in September 1996, going into the spring of 1997. That was during the Bill Clinton administration. That's how it worked. But that is not the only time it has worked that way. In 1975, it was something called Operation New Life during the Gerald Ford administration. After the long, terrible U.S. war effort in Vietnam came to an end, it was 130,000 of our Vietnamese allies who we brought out in a hurry. And again, Guam served as the safe waypoint, a U.S. territory where folks could be brought safely, to get them into safe housing, to get them any medical care they needed, to get them any care for their kids who they brought with them. Importantly, to get them vetted and get their paperwork and their applications processed so they could move on to new lives in the safe place the United States had promised them here in America. This was May 6, 1975, NBC Nightly News.
For the next 10 days, American ships like this one will be bringing South Vietnamese refugees to Guam. In all, the sea lift will add 80,000 evacuees to the more than 50,000 who have begun moving through Guam by airlift. The first evacuation ship, the American Challenger, docked at the Guam Navy Station early Wednesday morning, Guam time, with more than 5,000 people aboard. People at sea a full week, but most of them in good health and happy to be safe here.
Happy to be safe here. They came out of the American Challenger. But we found this footage from some of those Vietnamese evacuees who had already been to Guam. This was from their on-bound arrival at their next stop, which was Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. This was May 1975.
The government opened up a 4th military base for Vietnam refugees at Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. And Robert Hager was there when the first of them arrived from the island of Guam.
This is Pennsylvania Dutch country. The people here aren't accustomed to large numbers of strangers, and they're apprehensive about the refugees. But today, when the first plane load of refugees arrived in Harrisburg, the misgivings were temporarily put aside. It was a big, happy welcome from several thousand people. Pennsylvania's Governor Milton Shapp, who earlier had expressed some doubts of his own.
You have come to a land where most of us are either immigrants ourselves or the sons or grandsons or granddaughters of other immigrants. I welcome you here, and we will do everything we possibly can to help you get readjusted.
And there were signs. This afternoon, the Vietnamese settled down at Indiantown Gap. Most of them have already been in the camp on Guam for almost a month.
Again, that was May 1975. And, you know, it feels like a sort of a miracle and an utterly novel idea every time it happens, every time we do it. But it isn't a new invention every time. We have done this before. We did it with Iraqi Kurds in 1996. under President Bill Clinton. We did it with the Vietnamese evacuees in 1975 under Gerald Ford. We did it with Kosovar Albanians when the Serbs attacked them in 1999. Heck, 5 years after the marching band and the cheerleaders turned out for the Vietnamese evacuees at Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania, which you just saw, that same base 5 years later hosted more than 19,000 Cuban evacuees. Again, for the same kind of initial processing. We do this. We do this as a country. We do this in times of international crisis. We particularly do this when we have people to whom we owe a debt of gratitude as a nation because they helped us. Because they provided crucial local help to American service members at great risk to themselves in a dangerous place. And they were then targeted at home because they helped us. Those people we owe an explicit debt of gratitude to, in part because we make them an explicit promise that we will keep them safe if they help us.